Okay. Hello.
Rochelle,
How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Barely sane, but I am sane, I think, still.
Well,
Question.
I'm really glad you're doing this. I think that this is a great initiative, and you're always such an amazing resource to the law school community and your larger community. So I'm delighted, but not surprised that you're stepping up and doing this. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you doing this because we're trying to get different perspectives to make sure that we have the right kind of conversations and not just leaning too far to the left or leaning too far to the right. So, with that said, may I ask you, what is your name?
My name is Ann Gordon.
And can you tell us anything you wish to share with us so we can get to know you a little bit better? Know something that might help us understand the lens in which you see the world?
Sure, absolutely. So I work with you at Duke Law School. I direct our externships program, which is part of our clinical program. It's the whole clinical program is really an effort to make sure that students are getting experiential education. They're, the sort of textbook classes, the podium classes are really important in terms of getting students to understand what the law is and where it came from. And the clinical and experiential program is really to teach them how to practice it and what it means to work with a client and be out in the world as a professional. So I direct our program that connects students with internships, externships out in the community with government and nonprofit organizations. And I also teach now and again. I've taught, so I teach social justice lawyering with my colleague Jessie McCoy from the Civil Justice Clinic every fall. And then I've taught classes like I taught a prison abolition ad hoc seminar last semester. I've helped with our clinical offerings, teaching on the opioids crisis and mass incarcerations. And I've also taught in our Duke Law Plus program for pre-law undergrads who are interested in finding out what law school is like. So before I was at Duke, I actually spent a year in Mexico teaching at a law school in Mexico. And because I had worked at Berkeley Law School before then, I was also doing some kind of experiential moot court, mock trial kind of programs, and also teaching appellate advocacy. So we knew we were leaving Berkeley, and so we said, let's just go have an adventure. I have 3 kids, and we really wanted them to learn not just how to speak Spanish, but also how to live in another culture. And we thought that was really important. My youngest was 5 months old when we moved to Mexico, and we spent a year there and threw them in local school, and it really achieved all of our goals. It was an amazing experience. And before I was teaching at Berkeley, I was a criminal defense attorney. So doing appeals. I worked at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. I was at the First and Sixth District Appellate Projects doing regular kind of criminal appeals on behalf of indigent clients. And then before that, I worked at the Habeas Corpus Resource Center, which represented people on death row in capital post-conviction. So all of my clients were at San Quentin Prison north of the Bay Area. So I became a lawyer so I could do social justice work. And sometimes I feel a little bit disconnected being at the law school. It feels sometimes a little bit ivory tower for me. So I've tried to maintain my connection with the community by doing some board work. I'm on the board of the ACLU of North Carolina. And I'm involved in the American Constitution Society as well. And even although my youngest child just graduated from preschool, so I'm not on the preschool board anymore, but I was on my preschool board as well because I thought, I realized that the teachers weren't making a living wage. We had not been living wage certified by Orange County, and I found out that some of the teachers were making a salary that I thought was totally unacceptable. And so a few of us joined the board to change that. And so we feel like we fulfilled our goals. And so now I'm moving on. So board work has primarily been the way that I've been engaging in the community for the last couple of years as my kids were really young. But I'm also hoping that by talking with students about how to have a career in social justice and how to actually even just create a career that they feel strongly about and is connected with their values, that's kind of how I'm trying to amplify my own impact at a time that I feel like I can't be doing everything that I want to do.
No, that makes sense. Um, I want to say something about what you said about teachers. So my husband is a third grade teacher, and I don't care whether you teach in a private or public or any kind of school, teachers are underpaid everywhere, because whoever we are as we become adults, go to law school, go to college, whatever it is, if we didn't get the right fundamental education in elementary school, it would make a difference how we got to be where it is. And sometimes it's very confusing to me how a law professor or any kind of professor can be paid this much, where teachers all the way down here, and he couldn't do or she couldn't do what they're doing without the person that's down here who makes literally nothing. So, and you've been in my house at least one time. I know you met my husband. You know, my husband is an amazing third grade teacher, and I'm not just saying that because I'm biased, but I can't tell you how many love letters I get from his students writing to him, telling him how much they miss him. And I'm like, you sure I don't need to go have some chats with these little girls? You know, it's killing.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, my kids go to a bilingual school in Chapel Hill, so they're continuing their Spanish, and so they feel really connected with not just the issues in the community, but also their teachers have. My daughter's third grade teacher, I think, had 3 jobs, and she knew about that. She said, you know, after school she goes in nannies, and then on the weekends she works, you know, retail.
Right.
And I just think that's totally unacceptable.
I do too. But I do think it is rooted somewhere back when somewhere around World War II, where men went off to war, and so they had these women. Because if you look at early education, it was really either monks or all these religious kind of men that were teaching, and then you get to the point where men are required to go out and do something, and so they women become primarily, and you don't need to pay a woman because she's got a husband, and you know he's going to provide all these things for her, so you can pay him anything. And I think we're still stuck in that mentality. The agrarian kind of educational system is still broken by gender bias and gender discrimination, because you have women are predominantly the people that are teaching. So sorry
That's
about
exactly right. Never mind the school calendar, which really is not made for 2 working parents.
that. No, it is not at all.
They're really hard.
Yeah,
So.
and just a little COVID part about that, you know, the schools are actually thinking bringing little kids. I mean, I can see if they were in high school, maybe even middle school, but elementary school kids back into a building and expecting them to understand what social distancing is, not to hug or touch their friends or whatever it is that they do when they're in school. You know, like it seems like to me, almost everybody's putting money over lives, you know, as opposed to really considering what this means. So sorry about that.
And where the impacts are going to fall, right?
Right.
You know, it's not necessarily the people with a big, you know, the big 4,000 square foot house in the suburbs. It's going to be the people who are also, you know, living in multi-generational families, and, you know, whose parents, you know, don't have the luxury for working from home.
Right, exactly. And so that's that. But I will tell you something you might think funny. The teacher sent out, when my husband teaches, they sent out an email of what some of the letters the parents got from their kids. So one child wanted to fire her teacher, which meant her mother. Another child wanted to know if she could call 911 and report that she's being abused. It was absolutely a hilarious thread that went around among the teachers. But I thought it was just so funny to think that, you know, teaching is not easy, obviously. And then to be a mom at home teaching or a dad at home teaching, you know, it's kind of like, okay, these kids are looking at you like you don't know what you're doing. So why are you teaching?
Exactly right. I may be qualified. I'm marginally qualified to teach law students. I'm definitely not qualified to teach a 5th grader and a 3rd grader and a preschooler.
Yep. So, you know, that was really funny. But okay, let's get on serious tracks. I want to ask you a question about some of your work when you were a defense attorney. Why are there so many Black and brown men incarcerated in America?
Because from the very beginnings of our country has run on incarcerating Black people, not just Black men, but Black people, right? So, you know, I really encourage anybody watching this to read The New Jim Crow or watch 13th, and it really succinctly traces the history of, well, okay, slavery, and then, you know, after slavery was formally abolished, then, well, you know, what would the economy have done? So, you know, the effects would have been disastrous. So we ended up having a system of convict leasing. We then, how are we going to enforce that? Well, we have to have some people to imprison in order to be able to lease out convicts. Well, so then you end up having, patrols, and incarceration has been driving our economy since the beginning of our country. So, the war on drugs has contributed greatly to that. And even now, the furniture, we sit on at Duke Law School may have been made by people in prison.
Right.
And I remember when I was at a detention center, volunteering a couple summers ago at a family detention center in Texas, with women and children who'd come over the border, and it was right after the family separation crisis. And as you're driving to this private detention center, which, by the way, when you walk in, there was a sign that was a reminder of the stock price of the private company that was incarcerating these women and children. As you drove up, you saw on the side of the road a prison that was next door to this facility, and you saw guards on horseback, and you saw Black men actually picking cotton in a field next door. It was so jarring, and it was so unsettling, because we think we've come far, but we really haven't. And we've seen the effects of just the decimation of communities as a result.
Absolutely. And when you mentioned that, when Mexican Americans are escaping over the border to come to have a better life, to have a child separated from his or her parents is directly related back to slavery, because that's exactly what they did to slavery. You just took families and just tore them apart. And I was reading an article not too long ago about the effects of what's happened to these children who came across the border, and their mental health and well-being. Like they would have PTSD, or they would have something, because it's such a traumatic thing. You're less than 10, or I don't even know what the right number is, but you're some age and your mother's just snatched away from you, or your father's snatched away from you. That's got to be very traumatizing to have that happen to you.
Yeah.
So,
and I think the way that we justify that is treating people as less than human, right? When you consider your own children, you say, well, I would of course be distraught if that happened to me. You say, well, how can you support a policy that does that to other people? Well, they're different, right? Like they shouldn't have come over the border, or they don't look like me, or, they don't live in the same neighborhood I do. And we're really good at dehumanizing other people for the purpose of justifying these actions.
Right. And I think that, one of the questions we've been talking a lot about is white privilege, white power, and white supremacy. And are they three separate words, or are they one thing? Are they directly linked to each other, or are they three separate words that exist there? And a gentleman who I talked with yesterday said he thinks that this is all related to mental health, like mental health issues. And I can understand that a little bit, but, I was just looking at the news yesterday where your president was retweeting when somebody said white power. What is that? And how could it be that in 2020, in the 21st century, we still have these archaic ideas of who we are? And I have this analogy, and I'll tell you this, and I'm gonna stop talking in a minute, but I have this analogy I make all the time. If you went to the store and you bought a box of crayons, all the crayons in the box are white, what would you have? What would you have? And to me, that's how I see how white privilege, white supremacy, white power see themselves as just that box of crayons with nothing in it but white crayons. And they've got to be a certain kind of white crayon, because if you're Catholic or if you're this, you don't fit in the box.
Right.
In the crayon.
Well, it used to be called skin color crayon, right? Like grab a skin color crayon.
Right. That's exactly right. But when all the colors are white, it flies in the face of the universe, right? So you've got trees and flowers of every shape, kind, color, everything, and yet still we believe that one race of people are better than another, which is, I don't even understand this. I'm stopping there. So yeah. Let me ask you another question. So as in the work that you do, I do know how much you reach out to the Black and brown students at the law school, and I'm very grateful that you do that. You take time to care about them and to talk about them and to chat with them. And that's really, really helpful. I don't know if you listen to Bryant's or Jabrell's or Marnisha's, but one of the things that they all said to me, and I'll tell you in a little while about my relationship with Balsa, but that they didn't feel like they belonged. They didn't feel like they had a community, like, people made certain aspects about affinity groups they were in because of affirmative action or some quota. They weren't quite smart enough to be there, So as a white woman who is encountering these kinds of ideas and thoughts, how do you remediate that for students?
So I think the number one most important thing is to listen to people's experiences and not write it off because of your own frame. Somebody says something and a Black student will say, well, that was because of my race. And if they go to a faculty member or a staff member and say, I think this happened, and the response is, I bet it wasn't because of your race, right? It's probably because they didn't recognize you because you're a 1L, right? And they didn't think you were in the building for that reason or something like that. And I think, if I am, devastated by the events that have brought this conversation to the fore, but if there's anything good that comes out of it, I think that it can be that we as a white community can stop negating Black people's experiences and people of color's experiences by saying, well, maybe there's another way to look at it. Well, I don't look at the world through the frame of race, I think. I mean, of course we do, but we don't think we do. And so therefore, when you do, it doesn't, that doesn't seem reasonable to me. So Black students move through the Duke Law space very differently than white students do. And so for those of us who are in a position to make a change for students, I think the first step really is just listening to their experiences and not trying to negate them. I mean, another way is, so I'm writing a paper right now on bias and feedback, and it includes things like stereotype threat, right? When you have only 8 Black students in the incoming 1L class, they are going to move through that space of the law school, constantly experiencing the threats of, of trying to negate stereotypes, or, if they don't know an answer in class, it's not because, they didn't understand the reading like 80% of the other people in their class. It's because, of some kind of stereotype that they're worried that other people are going to put on them.
Right.
And the mental load that comes from that is huge. I mean, I remember talking to one of our 3Ls last year and saying, for example, on-campus interviewing is already really stressful. Everybody's really stressed out because everybody wants a job. But we also have the additional stress of what's a white acceptable way to wear my hair.
Right.
I also have to find out that information, right? I have to find out what a, white acceptable way to describe my, pro bono and social justice work so it doesn't look like I'm too militant, whereas a white student can say that they do these same activities without those same kind of implications for making people feel comfortable. So I think there is, not to mention, the increased time. We want you to do the recruiting events. We want you to do all of, we don't want white panels anymore. Okay, great. But that means we're calling on those exact same students to always be on the panels and part of our, advisory committees and things like that. And that takes an enormous amount of time. And, I wish I could say that will change after they get out of Duke Law School, but it won't. I mean, they're going to go to firms that also have, very underrepresented populations. And if they're part of those, they're going to be expected to do that recruiting work and the committee work and things. So, I think the best thing we can do for them is to listen and accept their, perspective as real, and also to prepare them for taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be hard out there in the world as well. The law is a white space.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think I can say this, and I'm speaking for myself, but I think probably most Black people feel this. Trusting a white person is putting your life in harm's way, right? So I am a Black law student, and I come and I say, Professor Gordon, I didn't really understand what you said about this. In my mind, you were going to move me to the bottom because I'm not smart enough to be here. You're going to make certain judgments about me. And then you're going to say, well, we just admitted another Black student because we just wanted to make sure and so as a Black person, if you have a question, you're more likely to ask your own kind or to go find somebody else that looks like you, like Guy and Trina and Jim Coleman and all those, because they've probably been where these students are. They've had those experiences, you know. And when I came to Duke, I came in 2008 because the law school had failed an audit, and immediately I started seeing bosses. So first of all, there were only 8 law students that year too, so 8 Black students at that time, you know. And I would see them Thanksgiving, you know. So we are working to the right before the Thursday of Thanksgiving, and they're still there, right? Where most of the white kids already gone home, and you know whatever it is, and they're still there because they can't afford to fly home
for a
and
long weekend, essentially.
right, and to maintain their way of life here in Durham. So I started feeding them. You know, my house is a home cooked meal. Anytime you want, you come get a home cooked meal. You know, I cook every Sunday. If you want me to make something special, like Jabril for a while was experimenting with being vegetarian, he would send me what he wanted me to cook him, and I would cook it for him. But
Good
I
for the grill.
I still have to have a long talk with him about that. But I think that in a lot of ways, you know, to be Black in America means to always be second guessing what you're doing. You know, even for the job I have, like I am called a senior manager IT. I report to a director of IT who reports to the director of the library who reports to the dean. And the perspective of who I am is based on all 3 of those paths up, not who I really am. You know, so like the things I have done at Duke, you know, we did food insecurity studies. We did all these things, and they never are recognized, never. And I think that for me, you know, it kind of reaffirms what I think about how people see Black people and Black and brown people, because really, and this is a colloquial anecdotal statement. People think Black people have to work twice as hard, twice as long to be half as good, you know. So it's kind of one of those things. So I think that at Duke and at most predominantly white schools, Black and brown students struggle to get through, and they in turn rely on each other. They rely on each other to get through. And if there is someone like me who's there to help, you know, so when you said what you did, you do externships now. I do too. I have a large selection of judges. So, you know, when Melanie Walker couldn't find one, you know, I called Sherry Beasley, and Sherry Beasley said, sure. And there she went, you know, same for Marnisha, you know. So, and it's like, you know, that's not my job. I'm not paid to do that. I don't get recognized to do that. When I cook all these meals that cost thousands of dollars over the course of years, no one recognizes that at all. It means nothing. And so for the Black students, to me, it's just being there for them. And I think
Yeah.
you are too.
Well, I'll correct the record to say that it doesn't mean nothing, right? Institutionally, you don't seem to be getting a lot of credit for it, but don't say that that means nothing, right? Because it is so important to your community and to these students and to everyone else who shows up at those amazing events, you know, and makes connections that they wouldn't have ever been able to make before. And so, you know, the impact you're making is huge. Whether or not it's recognized at an institutional level, I guess, is another question.
Yeah, I think that's right, because I mean, like, one of the things that was really important to me was the judges, you know, like, you know, so you can get to know this judge, you can put this lawyer, so Kenny Lewis, who's a Harvard grad, a Duke grad. I mean, you know, he's a private practice Black lawyer here in North Carolina, and he's brilliant. He's financially astute. When he came, we had an event just for him to come and talk to them. And almost all of them came and talked to him. And I mean, like, he told them the story of going from this part to this part to this part to who he is now. And he said it wasn't an easy path, you know. So, you know, what I worry about for Black and brown students at Duke and Duke Law is, are there enough Ann Gordons at Duke to help them get through to the other side? Because they know that I'm there and I'm expected to be there, but is there some white person I can trust that I can come to and say, hey, I need help? Or I didn't understand that, without feeling like that person's going to say, well, you weren't smart. That's why I let you in. You just let you in for some reason. Or one of their colleagues, i.e. one of their peer students, white peer students, hearing that and saying, yep, I was a affirmative action, or, you know, they needed a Black student or something. He wasn't smart enough to be here. And so when you're constantly churning that in your mind, you need to know there's some safe spaces you can go and have real conversations about whether you know what you heard in class, whether it made sense to you, but also to know that there's a safe place. And I think that's what you have shown me. You give them all the time. And that's a beautiful thing, that there is that. The problem is there's just not enough Ann Gordons. You need to go be cloned or something so you can make multiples of you so you can spread out all over the place. Because I will just tell you, for a white person, I have never felt anything but just a human being, just a human being. We just differ in skin tone, but that's it. And I think that's true for the students too. They feel the same way. We just differ in skin tone, but nothing else. And that's what this movement needs, is people to see each other as human and not by our skin color or our nose or our thickness or our lips or hips, but just a human being.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I think that's exactly right. That's very nice of you. I mean, I know that the clinical faculty feels really very strongly about these issues, and I'm not part of the doctrinal faculty meetings, but I would imagine that they're also, you know, reckoning with these same ideas of trying to make people feel comfortable in this space. So, you know, I hope that we're making progress in our institution with creating more spaces that students feel comfortable to actually speak their truth. And so, but I think that I think a good step is just to think about the language that we use, right? And once we are all on the same page in terms of languages used to describe experiences, we can have discussions about how to ameliorate those negative experiences. So, you know, if we're if we don't, like, we used to be uncomfortable with the idea of LGBT, right? It's like, oh, it's so many, it's this big long acronym, it's so many letters, like, I don't understand, why can't I just say gay or something? But now it's fully accepted, right? And we can talk about being, you know, part of the LGBT community. And I would hope that the same thing is true with the terms white supremacy, which now which many people are still very uncomfortable with. You know, defund the police. There's some discussion about what that means. Does it mean abolish the police, or does it mean, you know, devote resources to other, you know, areas that and services that may be better equipped to deal with, for example, people's mental health issues, et cetera. And the more that we can have discussions about, you know, what exactly are we talking about here, I think it will help bring on folks that may be just uncomfortable with the topic in general because they're afraid of saying something wrong.
And that's unfortunate, because I think, you know, I mean, like, there's some things that, you know, you can't, I can't remember, I think it was, I don't remember the year, but one of the governing faculty was teaching a class that had somehow had the race and slavery in it, and he used the N-word. And before the kids could get out the class, they were all standing in my office telling me, what should I do? Go tell the dean. And I don't know what came of that, but, you know, like, you know, and the way the faculty explained it, he was using it in the context of it had been used before, and that there are people who still use it, you know. And so I think that language is important, but I do think, like what you just said a minute ago about not being a part of the doctrinal faculty is exactly the problem that it is. Because you've got all of these people who've been teaching for 5,000 years, they've got all these credentials, they're recognized, but they don't have context, right? So they're not down in the trenches. They don't see what's really happening. And I think what the clinic does is quite amazing. But in reality, you know, if I'm a governing or tenured faculty, I don't really care what you think or what the student thinks, whether I have good student hours or whatever, because I've got job security for life, you know. So what are you going to do to me? Whereas if you're not, you're always trying to be your best self. Now put yourself in the seat of a Black person who's in that space and, you know, being their best self, you know. So I think I may have told you this story, but a couple of the BALSA 2019 class BALSA students were out downtown one night. They were out drinking and hanging out, whatever it is. And a white student threatened to kill 3 of them.
I know about that situation.
Yeah. And, you know, and like in the middle of the night, my phone rings, you know, and usually in the middle of the night when your phone rings, somebody's died, right? So, and when I answer the phone, I'm like, hello, this just happened. What should I do? I said, okay, let me wake up first. Let me get my head together so I can figure out. So, you know, Judge Beckton, who was a federal judge and, you know, he taught at Duke Law for a long time, was the first person I thought, you know, so called judge, and they knew him. They had met him several times, so they knew who he was. And Trina, you know, so that was the places where I said you should go, because I can't do anything about this. This is not in my wheelhouse. So I think that a lot of what and I don't want to talk about Duke because Duke overall is a great place. I mean, I think Duke does a good job of educating its students. I just think that there's so much whiteness at Duke that the brown and the black kind of fade to the back. You know, it doesn't stay out a lot. You know,
Or we don't yet have the critical mass of a diverse student and faculty population that people don't feel tokenized,
right.
And or feel like they have to put in all that extra work beyond the work that it already takes to try to get tenure or to do your classes or to, you know, get a good grade, and it's that extra time that's spent. I think that is unfair, and if we could get more of a critical mass of people in the building, people wouldn't feel that the weight is all on them.
Right, exactly. I think you're absolutely right about that. So we're going to move away from Duke, start beating up on Duke. Such a wonderful place. It's a great institution. Great. Okay. Now, about a month ago, a man named Mr. George Floyd was killed by a law enforcement officer. Someone put their knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And so my husband is really good mathematically and scientifically. So I asked him, I said, can you hold your breath for 8 minutes and 46 seconds and live? He said, no. He said, you've got to breathe somewhere along there. But for some reason, some law enforcement officers thought that holding his knee on this man's neck while he's handcuffed, laying face down on the ground, telling you he can't breathe, asking for his mother, and your humanity is to have your hand in your pocket. I mean, like, what did you think when you saw that? What crossed your mind?
Well, so I grew up in Minneapolis, and sort of the first thing I thought was of Philando Castile, which also happened right in Minneapolis, or a little outside. But I thought, oh my God, like nothing has changed. How is this still happening? But then of course that's my privilege, right? That was my first thought. Whereas if I were a member of the Black community in the Powderhorn neighborhood in Minneapolis, I would say, of course this is still happening. That shock is such a function of my privilege, right? It was sadness. It was feeling, it felt personal because I'm from there and I still have a really close, sort of mental connection with the area. And of course, anger and sadness. I couldn't believe that with, all the people around and the video and the 3 police officers who were there, right? I mean, one of them couldn't have said, okay, that's enough, right? It was, it connects back to, is this a human that I'm kneeling on? That this person was not a threat, right? George Floyd was face down on the pavement. They were not having to subdue him anymore. And so the fact that you would sit there with your knee on somebody's neck is because they weren't, George Floyd wasn't being treated as human.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't know what his transgression was, I don't know what it was he did. I've heard he had a counterfeit $20 bill or something, but I mean, so.
Last I checked, that wasn't punishable by death, right?
Right. Unless you're Black, do know that's the criteria. But, we've had so many of these, the white police officer goes into the Black man's house and shoots him. We got Breonna Taylor, and I mean, you could just keep going and going and going and going. You've got Trayvon Martin, you've got all of these instances that go back so far. And you're just like, surely somewhere along the way, someone has got to say this has got to stop. Because, one of the things I give white people credit for this. If it were not for white people, we would still be enslaved. We could not free ourselves. Although Harriet Tubman could, free some, it took white people who saw this as an injustice to do something about it, and I'm always fluctuating on how I feel about Lincoln. Was he really for the Union or did he care about Black people? Which was it, so I don't know about that, but, there's that part. But that why is it that now, and I'm asking you for your entire race, so I need you to speak for your whole entire race. Why is it now that you're just now recognizing that this dehumanization of people have been going on for so many hundreds of years?
That's a great question, Rochelle. I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer to it. Um, I think maybe there was a little bit of an awakening. I think Trayvon Martin started the kind of the most recent awakening of the sort of unequal justice and extrajudicial killing of Black people. And then, you say, oh, well, I have a kid that's that age, or what was that like? And so that sort of chips away at it a little bit, right? And then you get like Tamir Rice, who it's like, well, oh my gosh, that was a really young kid. I know young kids. Okay, maybe that chips away at it a little bit more. Then you get, Mike Brown, and there was actually, huge amounts of press and protests, obviously in Ferguson, and there was the Department of Justice report that detailed how essentially the Ferguson Police Department was funding itself on the backs of the Black community. And so maybe that takes a little chip away at the like, oh, maybe police actually aren't just out for the good of everybody, right? Maybe in fact there's unequal justice out there, and then and maybe it's a coincidence that people are feeling very out of control and vulnerable and also isolated because of coronavirus, and then they see what's going on now. Maybe people are watching more, I don't know, and so they say, it just filled up to the point of bursting, and all of a sudden we're now and we have the language too, right? I mean, we have the language to describe what's going on in a way that we might not have had 5 or 10 or certainly 100 years ago. So I think that's what people who are working in social change have to think like. It's the really incremental steps that are going to help make progress. If you say, in the time period of my life, I am going to make sure that no one's in prison anymore, right? I mean, that's admirable, but it's maybe not realistic. And so instead, if you can say, I'm just going to take the part that I feel the most strongly about, or I'm the most gifted at, or, use my strengths and talents, and I'm going to chip away at it just a little bit. And everybody who, can take their own little bit and chip away at this facade of sort of equal justice under law, and we can start looking at it more critically, it will move the needle. Now, do I think that this is going to be the end of police brutality against Black and brown communities? No. But do I think that, the result would have been the same with, well, I don't know, George Zimmerman with those stand your ground laws, maybe the result would have been the same, but, maybe we're going to be looking more critically at those laws. And, somebody who cares about, mass incarceration of immigrants is going to work together with the person who cares about mass incarceration of the mentally ill, who's going to work together with the person who cares about, mass incarceration of women for drug offenses, for example, and we can all work together to make that incremental change. So
I think that's right. I am not optimistic though. People say I'm hopeful. I mean, I've been hopeful now for 61 years and I haven't got any hope yet, so, and I feel a bit frustrated by it all, but I'm going to tell you a story first, and then I'm going to tell you something about a killing. So there was this family, they lived in a rural part of the Midwest, and I don't know where it was. And it was a husband and wife, and they had one child, and they had a bunch of dogs. And I mean, I guess they were pretty aggressive dogs, I don't know, but whatever it is, the child was just mangled and she died. And they charged the parents with, these are white parents, and they charged the parents with murder in their child, because by the time they had done the autopsy and all this stuff, the scars from, what a dog's paw would look like, and the bites from a dog had already gone, had faded away or whatever. And I'm not an expert in that area, so I don't know that at all. And I remember the white lady said, when they eventually got out of jail, because someone had actually taken pictures of what the little girl looks like when she first was bitten and mauled by the dogs. And she said, it is true, but I have been hearing my entire life, you are guilty until proven innocent, not innocent until proven guilty. And for Black people, we've known that forever. When Clinton did the three strikes thing, so we're sitting here thinking, okay, what is this? And then we have a meth crisis. You mentioned opioid. We have a meth crisis, and they're doing the same thing Black people are doing with crack, but we don't have a three strikes law for them. We got a three strike law for Black people. And so
that's right. We have treatment, not punishment. And to the point of like, well, what's the lens that white people are looking in this? Well, now we know more about addiction. And so we're able to treat this crisis in a more, compassionate way. Okay. It might be that. It might be because of the face of who this drug epidemic, who is the face of it, and places that have done media studies on the representation of sort of victims of the opioid crisis versus victim of the crack crisis, it just looks completely different.
And I think that to some degree, if this is going to get better, health justice, racial justice, environmental justice, wealth justice, all of those things need to be folded into a conversation. I've heard Spike Lee always says 40 acres and a mule. That's what they said back then that they were going to do during Reconstruction. Well, we still haven't gotten that. Now people are talking about reparations, but they don't know how to do that because they don't know who's truly an ancestor. It's like, oh my God, this is really crazy. But I think that it's not going to happen soon. You're going to see slow change, because first you have to acknowledge that this exists. And I mean, like when I said, white people have to acknowledge that Black people have really, really been neglected. And I think brown people too, because I find myself troubled by Native Americans. So these people were here before anybody else got here. They had lived off the land, they respected the land, they honored the land. And here comes somebody and they say, oh, we found America. Well, what are these people doing here? Let's kill them and get them out of our way so we can just take over and do what we want to do. So it's not just Black people, but we have a history of decimating populations for our own good. And I don't mean I mean yours. Like white people can find ways to justify their behaviors for their own benefit.
Yeah.
So, I just think that it's going to take a while. I told someone yesterday, I'm optimistic and pessimistic in the exact same minute, and it's like, will we change? Will we have differences? Will they stop killing Black and brown men? Will they start killing Black and brown women? Will they start separating people who are coming to America for a better life from their children? Will we do that? Because, to me, that's everything that's there is outrageous. It's more than outrageous. It's egregious. It's horrible. It's evil. It's every word that you can say. And yet still, we still don't get it.
Yeah, because it's that sort of making somebody else other, right? And I've heard it said that maybe the strides that the LGBT community was able to make in such a short period of time was because people realized that they knew LGBT people. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that I had, somebody in my family, right? And that is, I think, it's such an insidious byproduct of all of our policies of racial segregation over the, intervening decades, and not the FHA not approving loans in integrated neighborhoods, right? The destruction of Black communities to build highways and things like that, and the resegregation of schools, is that people don't know each other, right? And so you don't turn around and say, oh my gosh, it turns out, part of my family was African American. It's so much, it's harder to break that.
But that's a true statement, though. If you look at me, and I say probably 90% of the Black people in America have some white people in their background somewhere back there. Like you and I might be first cousins, so okay.
But no, that's exactly right. And so the more that we can emphasize that, I think, your concept of, who us versus them is, for one, isn't true. And second of all, the more that we can be in institutions and, community organizations and things that bring our groups together, the more we can say like, oh, it turns out, I do know somebody that fits in, that category that I didn't think I knew. Turns out it's a lot harder to demonize somebody when you know somebody personally, right?
Right.
I mean, we've seen it happen. You know, people say, well, they're one of the good ones or
Right,
something.
right, right. Got a label for them that makes them fit in this category, like Jim Crow, light versus dark, you know, and all that stuff. And Jay-Z's song, um, okay, OJ, the story of OJ, is just one of those really powerful, really exposés of what life is, right? So no matter how far up you get, no matter how far you go, you're still that. So when OJ got into trouble, Tiger Woods, everybody, they're just waiting at the fence to demonize you, even though you've escaped, if you will, whatever it is. I have we have about 5 minutes, so I have one more question for you. So in the system that we had George Washington, he had Sally Heming, wasn't that his name? And Strom Thurmond had, you know, and so even these extreme white supremacists or people who were pro-slavery had, I mean, and what I was surprised about Strom Thurmond is he paid for his black daughter to go all the way through school and everything. I mean, just truly phenomenal why he was constantly proliferating the N-word. You know, I'm like,
Yeah.
what is your daughter? You know, or maybe she's not one because she's my daughter. You know, so I think your point is very, very good. But
Yeah, it's baffling to me that, you know, you go to the African American Museum in DC and there's this, you know, this display of Thomas Jefferson, right? And all of the people that, you know, he owned, and how many of them were his own children.
children, right?
And they passed laws to ensure that took into account that white, you know, owners were going to rape their black enslaved people and to make those children slaves, right? Like it has to go through the mother. And that, I think, as much as I really try to see from another person's perspective, I have no idea how you could see your own child and consider that person to be less than you. I can't wrap my mind around that. So that's a great counterpoint to my argument of maybe if we all get to know each other a little better, right?
Right.
So I you know, removing economic incentives to other people, maybe, you know, if we can do that, maybe that's more of a, you know, if we stopped making it so lucrative to imprison people, maybe we would stop doing it.
Yeah.
I wish I had answers for you.
Yeah, I think this has been very important, and I think that some of the points you raised are just really phenomenal. You know, I just don't, in my mind, I don't see it changing very much because Mr. Floyd is killed like 3 weeks. There's another black man killed in Atlanta. You know, you got 2 college kids driving to go get something to eat, and they're tased. I mean, like, there's something about your brain that's got to really be a bit off. But then when you equate that to being like at an organization or a company or something like that, and the majority of your staff are white and male or white, whatever it is. So although you can equate violence to some folks, we're not violent. We didn't tase anybody, but we also didn't promote anybody. We didn't pay anybody equity. We didn't hire diversity. We didn't bring in more. What we've done is we kind of tried to make sure we stayed close to the margin so we could say we were diverse, but really, yeah, no. So
the story the North tells itself about, you know, not being, you
right.
know, prejudiced or not, like, you know, not having lynch mobs and things like that. Like
Right.
you can tell yourself that,
Yeah.
but you know, the cotton that was made, making those shorts that you were, you know, walking around in was made by slaves. I'm not sure how, you know, you got around that. So yes, we all have really good ways of justifying our own inaction and our own comfort off the backs of other people. And I'm the first to admit that, like, I have an iPhone, right? I know where that came from.
Yeah.
So less, this is what I always try to tell my children. I'm trying to raise very, you know, anti-racist children. And we've been talking about all of these issues very explicitly, you know, for a long time, and it makes them sad. And they say, you don't want to hear about this stuff. And it's like, well, you know what? You don't have, a lot of people don't have the luxury of not being able to hear about this stuff. So you aren't either. But then lest I instill in them this sense of like, oh, we're more aware, we're, you know, we're better than other people because we know about all these issues. I say, you know, we are still taking advantage of things that we should not take advantage of, right? We are still existing in a system that is, you know, advantaging us in ways that we don't even know. And we're, you know, as I've got a phone that was probably, you know, has materials that were mined by, you know, child labor. And so we can always do better, but to let that be the enemy of the good, you know, to say, well, I can't be perfect, therefore I might as well not even try, is such a cop out. And so I hope that people are taking this time to realize, like, I can educate myself a little bit more about this, and I might still make mistakes. And, you know, that comes from not hanging out with a box of all white crayons, right? If you do that, you're going to make mistakes. I don't know what I've said today. If I've said something that offended somebody, like, I would love to have a conversation about that, because I love to get called out, because I love to learn. Yeah. But because you don't want to exist in a world where you're constantly comfortable and feeling like, you know, you're not stretching, right? That's
especially when you're talking about the humanity of the world, not like, so if you don't, I don't know why Duke would not make you a doctrinal faculty, because you're absolutely brilliant, but I mean, that's one uncomfortableness, but the other comfortableness, knowing that you go home at night, you open your door, there's food to eat, you know, you've got everything you need to provide for your kids, and then there's somebody not far from you who has literally nothing. So, like with the schools closing with COVID, which is one of the things I think that's leading to them thinking of reopening the schools, are for kids who don't only get their meals at school.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know.
Yep. And to view all of that through a lens of, like, well, what if I weren't me?
Yeah.
You know, how would I view this? I think even just that exercise is so critical. So to just get out of our comfort zone and try to view the world through other people's lenses and frames is so important. You're not going to get it right all the time, but that's the beauty of learning. That's why learning is, you know, keeps life interesting. Absolutely. Talking to people like you.
Well, I'm old and crotchety. I think that's what my husband calls me. He says, I'm old, the old lady, you know, so.
You're not old and crotchety.
I'll let you tell my husband that. Thank you so much, Ann, for doing this. As soon as the video converts, I'll send you a copy, and you see it's okay, we'll upload it. If not, we'll redo it again. But I also hope you will do another one of these with me a little bit later. I want to look at this a month or two from now and see where we are. Have we made any steps forward? You know, have we made any progress, or are we still where we always are? You know, so this place. Yeah. So I hope you'll do another one with me.
I would absolutely love that. Yeah. I always like talking to you.
Same here. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
Thanks, Michelle.
And I'll see you soon. Bye.
Have a great day.
Well, I don't know. I may not see you soon.
We'll see each other over Zoom.
Oh, excellent. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Take care. Bye. Bye.